Meet Sharon Boulding, a trailblazer in AI, cybersecurity, and risk management, CTO, CISO, and consultant, and now the founder of Parsifer, an AI-powered solution protecting content creators in the digital age.
I realized pretty quickly the mid-tier to the small individuals, that long tail of creators, didn't have anyone advocating for them. They just want to write, but computers are not able to do because they're not sentient. They don't have a soul. If you can fingerprint the data, then the authors, the content owners can actually regain control of their content and have a stronger hand to negotiate for royalties. Let's say I'm replaced by an AI bot, they monetize that, and all of a sudden your revenues are crashing because nobody's clicking on your podcast links. And history has changed because somebody wants to erase the Armenian genocide. The true risk in AI is that 4 or 5 companies will dominate. It all goes back to data, doesn't it? It is like the new oil. My new endeavor is Parsifer.com. We're looking for use cases and ways to commercialize it and help people protect their valuable content.
Our guest today, Sharon Boulding, has worn many hats: CTO, CISO, consultant, and board member. And now she's building Parsifer, an AI-powered solution that's redefining risk management for content creators. Buckle up and get ready for a deep dive into the future of AI and cybersecurity leadership. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you, Mike. I'm so happy to be here. And it's such a pleasure to meet you and talk about things that really speak to my heart.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of the reasons I love doing these shows. I get to meet people like you who are brilliant, doing new things, and it keeps me on the cutting edge of what's going on in the technology world. So it's a fun thing.
Excellent.
So you're building Parsifer, and it aims to reduce risk for content creators through the use of AI. Can you tell us what inspired this venture?
It's a long time coming. I've always been interested in teaching computers to understand human language. And I worked at Citibank for a long time. I built an AI system in 42 languages for them that basically was looking at compliance issues where the bank had an obligation to make sure the employees were following the law. In that effort, over 6.5 years that I was with Citibank, I learned a lot about risk. And one of the emerging risks that I saw when I looked at NIST standards and other government regulations around data usage was emergent AI and how the data was being used to train models. I began to think from the point of view of a pure linguist. In other words, someone who deeply understands structure of language and how culturally language is used to create reality. And one of the key issues was not just deep fakes or people taking over someone's email account. It was really the ethical sourcing and the provenance around data was being stripped out, and the resulting raw text used to train large language models with or without the permission of the content creator or the owner of that IP. And we've all read articles about this news organization or that publishing house either suing OpenAI or Meta and other companies, and then negotiating terms around royalties. And I realized pretty quickly the mid-tier to the small individuals, that long tail of creators, didn't have anyone advocating for them, and they don't understand the technology in the first place. They just want to write. They just want to create paintings and sculpture and poetry and all of that cultural content that humans are so great at, but computers are not able to do because they're not sentient. They don't have a soul. I understood from not only my experience at Citibank, but going back decades as to how computers use data versus PhD level research that I did at the University of British Columbia on how culture is instantiated in language, and over time, different groups developed different languages to essentially manifest their view of the world. Now the computer was going to be controlling and manifesting that worldview. And the creators of that content of our cultural heritage were being left in the dust, demonetized from the standard SEO model. I looked at all of that and I thought, this is not right. At a basic ethical issue, how do we address that? If you can fingerprint the data and then follow it through its life cycle based on tracking that unique fingerprint, then the authors, the content owners, the publishing houses, the news organizations, the writers, the actors who are threatened can actually regain control of their content, demand that the provenance be put back in place so that they get credit where credit is due, and they can go and have a stronger hand to negotiate for royalties for future content or for back payment where their content was used without their permission. Essentially, what we're creating at Parsifer is a way to crack open that black box of AI and provide explainability via analytics and statistics of the content lifecycle. All we want to do is answer two questions. Who has my data? How is it being used? And as Mike, the simpler the question, the harder the technology in the background to answer it, right? So
Yeah.
I'm thinking everything is math and statistics. Where's the human part of that that is the semantics of communication? So I'm trying to re-inject the humanity into the machine learning, the complexity that are the current AI models.
Feeling overwhelmed? Drowning into deuce? It's time to reclaim your life and transform your leadership. The Decentralized A-Team Handbook gives you the strategies to build a high-performing, autonomous team. Delegate effectively. Communicate with impact. Achieve extraordinary results.
That's really interesting. I had an interview with somebody probably 20 episodes ago who is using blockchain technology to help artists monetize their work. And he had a similar philosophy to you where he saw the landscape and he was like, these people are either getting ripped off because a gallery will have them display their stuff and then someone steals whatever their artwork is, or they lowball them on the price and then sell it higher somewhere else. And so he's in process of creating this technology that will help end that and make it more fair to we can call them a creator and it's art and they have a right to be paid for that. And even down to if someone is in his system and then they pass away, their estate can enforce monetization of content.
I'd love an interview because we'd have a lot to talk about with an introduction to each other around that whole creator community. And it's not just the creator community, though, that needs the analytics. It's the AI companies themselves. Last year in Geneva, Sam Altman was saying, I don't understand how to explain it. I don't even know how my own technology works. Just imagine, if you would, a sort of provenance tracking that even if the AI companies strip out all the metadata, all the background, you can still identify your particular voice, your particular style of writing, and say, I've got a fingerprint of my article or my book or my lyrics for a song. And the response that this model gave me matches that fingerprint 98%. Okay, that's a clear violation of IP because they took the whole thing. It's not fair use. Fair use is a paragraph or a quote or a summary of the content, not the ingestion of the whole thing. But then the other part about it is, how do you even know if it's an 80% match or a 70% match? What portion of that is your content versus someone else's so that you can share the royalties? The AI companies will have to comply with regulations and laws that are being created right now. And the sooner they show pattern of willingness to track the data, to provide provenance, the less likely it is that they will get huge fines from these government agencies. Like at the bank, it's typical to say you get a $500 million fine for violating data privacy issues or for front running or for money laundering, or even if it's just a small issue like email exchange of data across a firewall of information, they'll still get these huge regulatory fines or misuse of information. I see the same thing coming in the AI community where these governments look at it and say, here's a cash cow. Let's find them a huge amount and get our share of it above and beyond taxes. Let's find them. Let's put up licenses. Let's put up different control mechanisms to ensure that these companies are under government regulations worldwide. The sooner you get ahead of that, the better. So it's not just that I'm saying AI companies are bad. It's that the whole ecosystem needs more transparency. And Parsifer aims to provide that transparency by becoming the analytics provider that begins that process of cracking open the black box that is a model, of saying, how do we explain this? How do we quality control it? How do we track where that content journeys throughout its life cycle from inception until it's archived? And even after being archived, it's still able to be monetized. It's still able to be licensed and reused for a variety of purposes, right?
Yeah. And like we said, it belongs to them. So ethically, they should be receiving payment if someone's using 98%, as you mentioned, of their content. And it's something that I see a lot of the platforms these days, like TikTok and YouTube, they're creating these remix features. And they're a little scary because people can remix the video into their own, as if it's their own video, and then put your content out. That's why I worry about today's big thing, faceless YouTube channels. If someone took this episode and remixed it, we could say, that's you and that's me. We can prove who we are. But when it's just faceless stuff, how do you prove it? You're an avatar, exactly.
I read an article real recently that one of the new features that I believe that Meta is working on, if memory serves me, is two AIs remixing your content and interviewing each other to provide summary and new insights based on your original content. Now, how that's going to play out in the market is yet to be determined. But let's say I'm replaced by an AI bot and you're replaced by an AI bot. They regurgitate everything we say and then they monetize that. And the click stream from an SEO model dives and you lose all your monetization on YouTube or TikTok as an influencer or as a voice of reason and expertise in the industry, then all of a sudden your revenues are crashing because nobody's clicking on your podcast links and nobody's trying to say, hey, I want to go to the source. Instead, they're reading this summary of this AI interpretation. And that's part of the problem too, is whose worldview is being used to interpret it. It doesn't matter whether it's socioeconomic, political, cultural. If somebody wants to enforce a worldview on a model, they just provide synthetic training data to make that model drift towards their personal perspective or their opinions about any given topic. So all of a sudden history has changed because somebody wants to erase the Armenian genocide or the Rohingya genocide that's going on in a particular historic context.
Right.
That's a danger as well. But most importantly, this whole idea that AI will drive everything, people won't be able to get jobs because AI is writing the news articles or such. That is really a straw man that is not very how would I say it? Not very reliable. The true risk in AI is that 4 or 5 companies will dominate and they will block other companies from doing the
Right.
same or
Monopoly.
from building a competing model, and the monopoly issues will only increase until the government steps in, and then again we have a lot of regulation. And it all goes back to data, doesn't it?
Always.
Like the new oil.
It's interesting though, because like you made a really good point. People, these bots, they could basically summarize this episode for us. But
Right.
then what happens is, based off of the worldview of whomever programmed them, they could completely change around what the concept of what we said was. And people will read that. And then they're going, even though they have an idea that it's a summary, for whatever reason, they then apply those beliefs to you and I. And then that's affecting our online reputation. It's affecting a lot of things. So could you share some examples like of the risks that content creators encounter and how AI can help maybe mitigate those for them?
Sure. I've studied a lot about risk in regard to AI, not just regulatory, but practical. One of the risks for content creators is just somebody stealing their identity, the bulk of their work, and then taking over and monetizing their information. And we've talked about that a bit. Another deep risk is that the market will disappear and what they've spent their career building will no longer be valid because there's no longer a marketplace of ideas or even a marketplace of content from which to operate in their chosen profession. Let's say somebody is a journalist. And we see recently in many articles, I just read one in a technical review, that media companies and Hollywood companies are laying off tons of people. And let me see if I can find this here. In the National Pulse, Hollywood corporate media experiences huge layoffs. Just imagine if all the movies were written by AI, the culture of LA, that whole atmosphere that is Hollywood, that everybody kind of stereotypes, would disappear because the bedrock of any creative community is the people with imagination writing something down or creating artwork or taking their own personal view of culture and putting a new spin on it disappears because everybody's been laid off. Where do all those people go? Do they create their own organization or union to try and fight back? We saw the screenwriters union and the strike they had in the early pandemic. In the long run, it damaged them more than they gained because now all these big Hollywood studios are laying off tons of people. But another risk is just the mental health of the people as they get depressed, as they can no longer find jobs in their chosen profession and they decide to abandon that. They get maybe not as extreme as suicidal, but just they give up on everything, right? Because AI is taking over. One of the ways that AI can mitigate this risk is if writers and creatives use AI as a tool instead of seeing it as a threat. The train has left the station, get on or get left behind sort of metaphor. But how you use that tool is critically important. Are you using it to edit your grammar? Are you, such as Grammarly provides? Are you using it within a creative workflow saying, I have this idea, give me 6 alternatives? Or even uploading your finished novel and saying, analyze this for plot gaps, right? All of the tools that used to take editors and publishers 6 months, 9 months to perform manually can be done by AI much more quickly. And then that gives the editor or producer a starting point from which to do their work. I've got these 6 issues with this novel. Now, as I read through the novel, I'm going to be looking for these things, and they'll become self-evident from the moment I open it up and begin reading the first sentence. I can check for them because I know to look for them. That's the way AI can be a tool to help instead of an overwhelming entity that threatens. One of the key AI risks is bias. And so you can use this tool, but you have to be aware that it may have bias or ethical concerns, or it may just lack data to represent some of the demographics that are critical to your work. Let's say that an African American writer is using AI to review their work. And because that model did not have a lot of data or material information about the African American experience and community, how can it be a useful tool when you're not even represented in the model of the world? So that becomes another point where the person becomes threatened by the technology. But you can turn it around and say, let's lobby for more representation, more diversity of data within the model. Or alternately, you can say, I'm going to start my own company and build my own model that is African American specific or African specific, and create a view of the world that is unique to your needs and purposes. And then all of a sudden, you're competing with the big guys because they ignored a certain critical set of information.
Well, what I can add to that is I look at ChatGPT or Gemini, any of those tools, as more of a marketing assistant. So if I were to hire somebody, like you said, go through this novel and find the plot gaps. It's a great tool for stuff like that. And AI is a part of my workflow when I get these show episodes put out. And one thing that I did discover, that one of the problems is we use the word intelligence, artificial intelligence. And so people think that the computer's thinking for itself, and they don't really realize that it's been fed a bunch of data. And so an example of that is a lot of times I'll take a transcript from one of these shows and I'll ask it, I'll say, here was what the key point of the interview was about. Find me all the moments where we discussed this, and then I can review them and pick out the best points. I have a prompt that I save and I just grab it and I throw it in place. And I usually leave the person's name blank and then I add it in. And for whatever reason, I must have overwritten it. And one of the episodes, I put in the transcript and I put that thing in there and I ran it and it starts saying, John Smith said, blah, blah, blah. John Smith wasn't in this episode. What's going on? Yeah, it's because I told it that was the guest's name up above. And so then it completely ignores what I introduced the guest. I used their real name. Just completely ignores it because the data I gave it was wrong. And that's the danger that people aren't understanding. One of our virtual assistants, it was her job to write blog posts for one of our websites. And I started to get suspicious because all of a sudden these posts, like the tone change and all this stuff changed. She was using AI to write the articles, and a lot of it was just plain wrong. Like when you'd read it, you're like, that is not true. You've just lied in this blog post.
You've brought up a very important point, which is one of the philosophies I've had throughout my life, not just in technology, but that is the difference between information and knowledge, right? The basic data and facts, intelligence and wisdom. A model like Gemini or Bard or ChatGPT does not have wisdom the way a human would. And wisdom is basically the ability to correctly apply information and intelligence to the situation, to the context in which you're operating, and to know the difference between good and evil. Basic concepts like that, identification of topic and theme, sadness and happiness. You have to teach it to say, this is the data and this is the information. Now give me the intelligence out of it, right? So that it can reflect sentiment and generalized topical knowledge. But what it's lacking is the wisdom to know how to apply it to the situation. A machine can only do precisely what you tell it to do. In your example, you told it the wrong thing, so of course it screwed up.
You have to read what it's outputting. And I paste this into
Copy and
to
paste.
the
Yeah.
website. You have to read what it wrote, make sure that it addressed the issues you asked. I actually find when I teach people about using generative AI, I'll have them use Midjourney, because if you
Mhm.
go to Midjourney and you give it a terrible prompt, you get a terrible image. And if you give
Yes.
it a really good prompt, you get an okay image. I still don't think it's there, but
Right.
it's way better if I give it one sentence versus really describing the scenario. Like, for instance, you could say, give me a photo where there's a dog swimming in a pool. Well, what you're going to get is looks like a body of water with a dog in it. But if you say, give me an image where there's a dog swimming in a pool surrounded by palm trees and bright flowers, and there's a slight breeze and whatnot, it will replicate what you ask it to replicate rather well. And I show people that as an example of why the prompt is so important. You have to do it the correct way, or you get the
Correct.
wrong answer back from it. And unfortunately, we are in this mode where everybody's headline readers and they're in a hurry and they don't want to take the time. And so they put the prompt in, they get the answer back, and they're like, that's not bad. You don't want not bad. You want good. And
Exactly.
you have to stop and say, all right, here's where I made a mistake. I think AI, we always talk about it as like this impartial, data-driven system. But do you think it could ever be too impersonal?
It's always going to be impersonal because it's not a human, right? And even though you enforce a personality on it, it's still based on a human. Think of Alexa out of Amazon. Essentially, what they did was analyze all sorts of situations and have a human voice record the information. And behind it all was a huge database of possibilities and scenarios. And none of it was particularly AI-ish. They were faking it in the beginning. And then they began to, how do you say, not just innovate, but automate this piece or that piece such that the whole process over time became much more autonomous. And then it began to make mistakes once they turned it over to the machine and they had to retrain. And eventually they began to get closer and closer to what they wanted. All of that to say, whether you're prompting an AI with a lot of context and information, or you're building the back-end AI system for a service like Alexa, it's a matter of iteration until you fine-tune it down enough that you've got the right targeted model that will meet the needs of the business or of the person. What I do when I use ChatGPT or when I use Gemini or Midjourney is I start out with the context. I give it some information and I say, based on the previous response, now do this. And I begin to refine it down and correct what I'm seeing until I get precisely what
Yeah.
and that can take 5 or 6 iterations, or it can take
Exactly.
20 to 100 iterations. It just depends on how complex the issue or the task at hand is. And machines are very good at that task-oriented type of activity as long as you're very precise in describing it. But none of that will ever amount to a personality. It will always be very dehumanizing. It's just like writing code is a simplified, broken down version of human syntax in language and human methods of expressing things. You have an object in code for starting in the 90s with object-oriented programming techniques. That object is the equivalent of a noun or an entity. You have commands, those are verbs, right? All of that is modeling human language. And what we're doing with these AIs is we're superimposing on them an avatar or a personality that comes across as cold and impersonal because it's a conglomerate of a pastiche of these different types of elements that make up a human soul. But it will always be impersonal. It will never have a soul. We'll never get to Terminator mode where the machines just take over the world. If we ever do, it's probably a couple hundred years in the future and you and I won't care. We'll be dead.
It's interesting how I use a tool called Otter AI, and it transcribes audio and video files for me.
Oh, yes.
And within the last 6 months, they've added a chat GPT type feature to it where you can say, all right, I'm in this transcript, go to the chat window and let me have it rip apart this thing and do some analysis for me. A very common thing that I was trying to use that for was to get example Instagram captions for an episode that we did. I'm sarcastic and sassy, so I want that kind of voice. So I'd say to it, give me 5 sassy Instagram captions. Okay. It actually came back and told me that it couldn't do that because it is not allowed to do anything negative. Why it's negative, I don't understand that. But I understand where it's coming from. It's thinking like snappy, like you're being sassy at a kid
Or
being sassy to their parent, really
Yes.
sarcastic. But comes down to whoever programmed it didn't like the idea of, and so they told it that's a no-no. But then you could go to and ask it to do the same thing and it will do it. Depending on the words you use, you get what you ask for. But it's funny what the machine thinks sassy sometimes. They just go,
Right.
I
And
was
then-
way over the top, man. Why are you doing that?
Yeah. So then you think maybe I'll change the words in the prompt. Give me something not sassy, but over the top, sharp, humorous, which is the
Right.
equivalent of sassy if you go to Roget's
Yeah.
thesaurus. And then it would probably do it because over the top is fine, sharp is fine, humorous is fine. But the machine will not know that those things equate to sassy, this attitude, this kind of talking back, being semi-dark humor is something that the machine cannot understand at this point, if ever.
It's just very interesting. We have a nighttime podcast that my wife and I do together, and it goes out once
Yeah.
a week. And I have to release social media content for that. And so I'm constantly having to create new images. And so I'll feed it a transcript of our show and say, all right, give me a description of what you think the YouTube thumbnail should look like for this. And once in a blue moon, it will hit something that I could literally take it, put it into Midjourney, and it will give me this image that is just amazing. Like we had one where
Yeah.
we right near our house here one morning, we were heading to the gym like at 5 a.m. and my wife looks over and she says, why are there police crawling all over those two businesses? There's a smoke shop and a gun shop right next to one another. And
Wow.
they drove a car into each one of the places to try to rob them. And then of course couldn't start their car and had to run and leave the stuff behind. We had this whole episode where we talked about that. And so I had ChatGPT look at the transcript. I said, what do you think should be on the YouTube thumbnail? And it told me. And I looked and I was like, that is actually a great prompt. So I copied it. I dropped it into Midjourney. I got a strip mall with buildings, a couple cars crashed into it. Looked like the apocalypse had happened. There was smoke and everything. And I was like, this, and it was cartoonish, which is what I asked for. It was
Yeah.
like in 2 tries, I got the great thing. And like you made the point earlier about having to go back and refine the prompt. And then based off of the previous response, refine it a little further.
Right.
That's just what you do. When I don't know about anyone else, but when I write, it never is the final draft is never the first thing I write. I have to go back and reread it. And then I got to change this. And I don't like this here. I want this over here. That's all you're doing when you're continually
Okay, you're
refining
gonna
your
hate
prompt.
me. Every time I would write a homework assignment or an essay in high school, college, graduate studies, if I turned in the first version, I got an A, a 4.0. If I edited and revised it and refined it, I got a B or a C.
You overthought it.
Yeah. So I had to learn this technique of dealing with machines and debugging the interaction because I was so used to, I'm a good writer. I know how to communicate. I speak a lot of languages, both living and dead. I speak a lot of computer languages. I know how to manipulate words. And then I realized this is a different beast. I have to manipulate the words in an iterative serial way that is very different from how I write
Yeah,
to
why is that?
communicate to human because I'm dealing with a stack of technology. And what most people don't know is that ChatGPT, when it released its big 3.0 release, it's actually 8 different models based on 8 different domains from various views of the world that they stitched together to get this generalized transformer model, right? So they looked at legal, medical, political, history, all these things that are topics that used to be in the card catalogs in the university libraries. And they had these small language models for legal or for architecture or for geopolitical history or whatnot. And they stitched them together to take the larger, more globalized view of human knowledge, history, cultural artifacts, whatnot. That left gaps in that model, and they've been filling in the gaps ever since, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't realize that, you don't know to structure your prompt with context. And so you would say something like, in the context of the legal domain, I'm interested in IP law. Right?
It does. That's something that people need to learn. It does change the output when you
Yes,
tell it that in a huge way, because it's figuring out which part of its model to use. But that's the thing. Like, I don't think people. You're right. I don't think people understand it, but I don't think they really need to understand it. I think what they need to understand is how to write these prompts so that they're getting what they want. If you give them a tip, tell it to act like whatever, and then you'll get a different response. It's going to help people. But this has been super intriguing. You have probably the most knowledge about this topic of anyone I've had on this show. And I've had people who are running large AI companies, but you, because of your leadership positions in the past, you've really obviously dug into this. Can you let the listeners know how they can connect with you if they want to ask you more questions, find out more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. My new endeavor is Parsifer.com. So you can check it out there. I'm Sharon, SHARON, at PARSIFER.com. You can also contact me at my private address, bouldingbroke@gmail.com, which is a consulting firm I've run for years in the area of AI and data analytics, natural language processing, and such. I live in Colorado Springs, originally from Seattle, and I would love to hear from your listeners who are interested in this topic, because we're looking for use cases and ways to take the fingerprinting technology I talked about, commercialize it, and help people protect their valuable content. Thanks so much, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I know, especially on a Friday morning, it's not the easiest thing to do. So I really appreciate it.
Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here for another episode of Gaining the Technology Leadership Edge. We have new episodes every Wednesday, 8 a.m. Pacific time. See you next week.